Hi everybody, this is Lars Wemmje, and welcome to my Love VFX course, in which I will talk about the creation of my fantasy short film nöck with Nuke Studio. You can find the link to my short film in the description of this video. In the next 5 lessons, I will walk you through some of the comps of my short film. Since there are 33 shots in this project, I will only focus on a few of them. In this lesson, I will focus on the creation of shot 10, 20, and 40. Just like I've shown you in lesson 4, I have exported the grading for all of my shots from Resolve as LUT files, and then I applied these LUT files with OCIO file transforms as timeline effects in Nuke Studio. That gave me the freedom to quickly tweak the grading and react to some valuable feedback from friends, without having the need to render every shot again. Right from the start, it was really important to me that the images in the short film would be as touching as the music that I've chosen for this project. In the first shot, we can see a young girl who is devastated by the fact that her family is breaking apart. In my eyes, the young actress did an amazing job by transporting that emotion onto the screen. But it was the combination of her performance and some trickery in Nuke which made this shot look like that. So let's take a closer look at shot 010. As you can see here, I always like to work clean in my scripts. Having a clearly visible B pipe that goes through your whole note graph just makes it easier for every compositor to read your script. Working this way allows you to go from top to bottom and see what elements are being added to the comp or what sections are being modified. If you add some labeled backdrops to it, you can make it even easier for everyone to see what's going on. I'm a big fan of having all of my assets and all of the footage I need in a big backdrop at the top of my note tree. To make it super easy to get to all of that material, I use a tool that is called Stamps, which you can think of as a postage stamp system on steroids. If you haven't heard about stamps, you should definitely take a look at this awesome and free tool on Nukepedia.com. You can find the link to Stamps and a review of this tool that I created for Nukepedia in the description of this video. Another tool that I always use for all of my comps is dustgrain, which in my eyes is the best regraining tool for Nuke. This tool is available for free on Nukepedia too. You can also find the link to dustgrain and a review of this tool that I created for Nukepedia in the description of this video. Since I use dustgrain for all of my scripts, I always work with a denoised plate and renoise my comp with dustgrain at the bottom of my note tree. That is why you will always see this dustgrain backdrop at the bottom of my note trees. Since I didn't like the noise that my camera was giving me, I created a grain plate of some Arri Alexa footage, and then I applied that external grain to all of my shots with dustgrain. That is another awesome feature of this tool, which you can activate in the Replace tab under External Grain with this Use External Grain checkbox. The dissolve node right under dustgrain helped me to find the right balance between the denoised and the renoised plate. I will show you how I created this grain plate in just a moment. But first, let me walk you through all of the other parts of this script. The first thing that I did after denoising the plate was getting rid of some twitching movements of her nose. I did that with a planar track that I created with Mocha Pro for Nuke, and an inverted corner pin to get a stabilized view. Then I extracted a frame hold of this area of her nose and applied a copy of the first corner pin that is not inverted to that extracted area, so that it would move correctly with the movement of her nose in the plate. That way I could just merge it over. If you want to know more about this retouch workflow with Mocha Pro that I use for the majority of my cleanup tasks, you can watch my Mocha Pro for Nuke tutorial. You can find the link to that tutorial in the description of this video. In the next section, I removed this bright spot on her eyelash with the same technique that I used for the twitching nose. But instead of corner pins, I used transform nodes, and instead of a frame hold, I just used a transform node to get rid of that bright spot on her eyelash. In the lamp backdrop, I extracted a darker version of the lamp and merged it over the plate, so that it would not completely burn out after the grading of the shot. As you can see here, if I look through the grading LUT with the OCIO file transform and toggle this merge node off and on. Here comes the part in which I made the young girl look like she was actually crying, with 2 color corrections and a masked plate of a drop of water on her cheek that is tracked on and merged over her face. The first color correction makes it look like she has tears in her eyes, and the second color correction makes it look like her eyes are a bit red. The plate of the drop of water on her cheek that we recorded worked like a charm. In my eyes, it really does look like she's crying in that shot, which is why I was really happy with the result. After the tear on her cheek, I sharpened her a little bit, then I stabilized the plate with a transform node to remove some micro movement the plate had. I also added a digital zoom to the shot with another transform node that has some animation in the scale knob, and I added a crop node to keep Nuke from rendering pixels that are outside of the frame, to reduce the rendering time. And finally, I renoised the comp with dust grain. Before we move to the next shot, I'm going to show you how you can create your own grain plate with dust grain. So after connecting dust grain the right way, pressing the Analyze button in the Analyze tab, and correcting the curves of the red, green, and blue channels in the Adjust tab, so that the slopes of these curves are always positive, you can go to the Replace tab, select Normalize Grain in this drop-down menu, edit your sampling region, and activate scattering to create your grain plate. If you want to, you can also modify the cell size to adjust the way your sampled grain is being scattered over your frame. Once you're happy with your grain plate, you can render out one or multiple frames so you can apply this grain to other comps. I'm a fan of just rendering out one frame of my grain plate because I always use the scattering feature of dust grain, which only needs one frame of an external grain plate to scatter and animate your grain over your whole sequence. Before we move to the next shot, I will show you what sh010 looks like. This is the transformed plate. This is the comp. And this is the graded comp. Now let's take a look at sh020, which is retimed to look like a slow motion shot. In this shot, we can see what situation the young girl is in, which is not a pleasant one. Once again, I added the footage backdrop to the top of the node tree with all of the footage that I used in this script. The mother is played by my wife, and I'm playing the father, because that was just the easiest way to shoot it. But of course, I couldn't act and direct at the same time, which is why we shot this plate without me, as you can see here. And to have an eyeline reference for my wife, we just placed a dot on the wall so that she would be looking in the right direction. Then we recorded another plate of me just standing still, which I wouldn't really call acting, but that's what was needed in this case. And then I just extracted and merged myself over the plate. In the next section, I merged another darker version of the lamp over the right side of the plate so that it would not burn out after the grading. Then I reduced the highlights on the left side of the wall with a color correction so that the left side of the wall would also not burn out and look too bright after the grading. To get the slow motion effect I was looking for, I just used the Chronos node and retimed the sequence. Then I used another transform node and a crop node to create a digital zoom and dust grain to renoise the comp. And that was it for this shot. This is the retimed and transformed plate. This is the comp. And this is the graded comp. Now let's take a look at the last shot in this lesson, which is sh040, which is also made to look like a slow motion shot. Right from the beginning, it was very clear to me that this shot would have a CG ring in it, because I don't have a super slow motion camera. And being able to animate the ring in 3D just gave me a lot of creative freedom. Fortunately, I liked the slow motion animation of the ring in the previs so much that I kept most of the animation and only modified it a bit to make it fit to the plate. By now, if you look at my script, you can clearly see a similar setup throughout all of my scripts, which is exactly what I like because it makes it easier for me to jump in and change stuff. My tools of choice when it comes to 3D animation and rendering are Maya and V-Ray. In this case, I rendered the ring with the background, which is projected onto a reflective plane, but that was just a personal preference. I could have also rendered only the ring with an invisible floor that I would have shaded as a shadow catcher. Alright, let's take a look at this shot. Right after denoising the plate, I removed some tapes under our shoes with roto paint nodes. Then I added the reflection and shadow of the ring to the plate with some color corrections. The masks for these color corrections are modified layers from the CG rendering, but I'll get to that in just a moment. After the color corrections, I merged the CG ring over the plate. And then I added an ambient occlusion shadow to the ring and the floor by multiplying this modified ambient occlusion layer with the comp. Then I added some more color corrections and a digital zoom to the shot. And finished the comp by renoising it with Das Grain. And that's basically it. The most important part about comping the CG ring into the plate was looking at some reference that I shot and trying to match the CG ring to it as good as possible. I can't stress enough how important it is to have a reference on set for anything you want to create or recreate with your CGI, which stands for computer-generated imagery, so you know exactly what it should look like. Of course, you can't have a live-action reference on set for everything, but you should always think about it whenever you can actually use something real on set as a reference for your CG elements. So here's what the CG ring looks like without any color corrections, and here's the color-corrected version of the CG ring. It's not a big difference, but I believe it's the difference that really matters in this case, and it's super helpful to have such a live-action reference for your 3D and compositing work. I always create a beauty rebuild for my CG renders that looks like the setup here. On the left side you can see the beauty rebuild and some color corrections, and on the right side I always like to create some masks that I use to modify the plate and the beauty rebuild. I'm a big fan of working with an additive beauty rebuild workflow, which means that you plus the layers together that make up the beauty rendering. But that is just a personal preference. There is also a subtractive workflow, but I will not get into that, since there are enough online resources that cover this topic. I will talk more about my beauty rebuild setup in lesson 8 of this course. So I plus these layers together to rebuild my beauty rendering, and just color corrected the specular layer a bit. It's a good practice to only keep the channels you actually need by using the remove node after shuffling out your layers to save a lot of rendering time down the road. I have to thank Tony Lyons for reminding me of that after I showed him some of these scripts. After the beauty rebuild, I added some more color corrections to the ring. The masks I created on the right side are a mask of the reflection of the ring on the floor, a mask for the ring, one for the floor, one for the shadow of the ring, and one for the inside of the ring. After copying the alpha of the ring to the B pipe with the copy node and pre-multiplying the RGB with the alpha, I had to copy the velocity layer into the B pipe for this vector blur node to create some motion blur, because I had previously removed all of the other layers. I also applied some motion blur to the ambient occlusion pass. And finally, I added a soften node to the CG ring. Normally, you should apply the lens distortion of your plate to your CG render, but in this case I left this part out because the distortion of the 50mm lens that was used for this shot is so small that I didn't find it necessary to add it to the CG ring. And that's it for this shot. This is the transformed plate. This is the comp. And this is the graded comp. I really hope you liked this first compositing lesson of my course.
Alright, that was it for this lesson. In the next lesson, I will talk about the creation of shot 80, 90, and 120 of my short film nöck. Feel free to post any questions you have about my work in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer all of your questions. If you want to see more of these videos, don't forget to subscribe. Again, this is Lars Wemmje. Thank you for watching, and goodbye everybody.